Good morning and welcome. My name is Cheryl John Cox. I'm with the Sierra Club. I'm a methane organizer. And I wanted to start off by saying that it's not a coincidence that the closing of the methane regulations comment period to US EPA coincides with the United Nations Climate Change Conference happening right now in Paris. As residents of Mansfield and Ohio, across the nation and across the world experience increased extreme weather patterns, it's time to act now. Oil and gas is the largest industrial emitter of methane. Methane is a very powerful greenhouse gas that is much more potent than carbon dioxide. Oil and gas accounts for a full 30% of the United States methane emissions. In 2013, oil and gas emitted 7.3 million metric tons of methane. That's equivalent to the CO2 that's emitted by 160 coal-fired power plants. Even more critical is the impacts that are foisted upon our residents, our community members, our friends, and our neighbors with the toxic chemicals that are emitted by oil and gas along with methane emissions. These neighbors and friends are living around infrastructure such as you can see on these film clips, and they are bearing the burden of oil and gas extraction, and their health and their livelihood is dependent on our bringing methane and toxic emissions under control. And our climate is at stake as well. Now I'd like to introduce Don Bryant, City Council member from Mansfield at large.
Thank you very much. Don Bryant, Mansfield City Councilman, Councilman at Large, City of Mansfield, and I have asthma. 1 out of every 12 children in our country suffers from asthma, and 1 out of every 7 children and adults in Ohio will suffer from asthma at some point in their lifetime. As someone living with asthma, I can tell you there are quite a few things that can trigger an asthma flare-up or an attack in both children and adults. These include both natural and unnatural causes. One of these unnatural causes of these asthma flare-ups or attacks are industrial methane emissions. And we can actively work to curb or reduce these emissions, and that's why I'm here today, to raise awareness about the recent proposal by the US EPA to reduce the leakage of methane from industrial oil and gas operations. As many of you probably know, methane is a primary component of natural gas. I strongly believe Mansfielders have the right to a clean and safe environment. Here in Mansfield, we're home to many world-class industries. Mansfield and Richland County has been a center of industrial production and technical innovation for a very long time. Being that we are an industrial city, often when industrial sources such as oil and gas emit methane, they also release what are known as volatile organic compounds into the air. These compounds trigger chemical reactions that create ozone at the ground level, which can harm people with asthma or other respiratory conditions. In summary, the impacts of industrial oil and gas operations, and specifically methane emissions from these operations, can harm lung function and irritate the respiratory system. So I am encouraging and asking our senators from Ohio, Senators Brown and Portman, as well as our congressional delegation from Ohio, to support the EPA recently proposed standards to address methane emissions from the oil and gas industries. These standards will help keep our air clean and lock down unnecessary pollution to our environment. Thank you very much. Oh, I'm sorry. I want to introduce Lee Geis with the Blue Green Alliance.
Thank you, Councilman. Oh, good. And good morning, everybody. My name is Lee Geis. I'm with the Blue Green Alliance in Ohio. And let me tell you a quick minute about what the Blue Green Alliance is. We're a consortium of 14 labor unions and 5 environmental organizations who believe that we can retain and create jobs, all while cleaning up the environment. That we shouldn't fall prey to the false choice of good jobs versus a clean environment. We can and will have both. The Blue-Green Alliance endorses the move toward a national set of standards to directly regulate methane emissions from the oil and gas industry. We support the Obama administration's goal of reducing methane emissions by up to 45% by 2025. There are proven solutions, as the councilman referenced, made right here in America that are already available that could eliminate up to half of the methane pollution by simply plugging leaks. Keeping methane in the system will help companies cut waste in addition to reducing the climate change impacts of these emissions. Whether it's repairing and replacing our leak-prone natural gas distribution pipes or continuing to develop and deploy technologies that prevent the escape of methane to the atmosphere, we can be doing a lot to reduce emissions right here, right now. Ohio, as the councilman also mentioned, and right here in Mansfield, is home to companies that provide good paying jobs and the services necessary to reduce methane emissions. National methane emission standards are a win-win. They would reduce the pollution that fuels climate change and other harmful pollution with low-cost, American-made technology, and would reduce wasted energy that could be used for homes and industries in Ohio and across the nation. I'd like to next introduce Laura Burns with Moms Clean Air Force. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Laura Burns, and I'm the Ohio Field Organizer for Moms Clean Air Force. We are an organization that seeks to educate people about the health risks that are posed by pollution. This week, the U.S. Is participating in the Paris Climate Conference. A primary goal for this event is to discuss our greenhouse gas emissions and the actions that we can take to rein them in. The Obama administration set the target goal of reducing industrial methane pollution by 40 to 45% by the year 2025. If that goal is to be met, there are important steps like putting a cap on emissions from the oil and gas industry sites right here in Ohio that must happen first. Providentially, in August, the administration also proposed the first ever methane pollution standards. These standards, which are not yet final, are an important step in claiming responsibility for our contributions to a heavily polluted atmosphere, a key component in climate change. In the year 2014, over 13,000 metric tons of methane was leaked in Ohio. Methane is 80 times more powerful than other greenhouse gases in trapping heat within our atmosphere. Worse yet, methane pollution is a significant health threat. Not only do the chemicals leaked with methane cause cancer, they create smog, which triggers asthma attacks, like Dawn mentioned. If something is not done, it is predicted that the industrial methane pollution will increase by 25% by the year 2025. Last year, nationwide, enough industrial methane pollution was leaked that could have powered every home in Ohio. To be clear, these standards are not one-sided in their benefits. There are currently 15 gas leak safety companies in Ohio, which would expand to employ more Ohioans to ensure each industrial methane leak is plugged. As a conservative Republican, a person of faith, and a parent, I believe we have a moral imperative to stop pollution in order to protect the one planet that we are given, to safeguard the air regardless of party or faith that we all breathe. In order to do that, methane must be a part of the conversations in Paris during the climate talks. And our leaders in Washington need to stand up and ensure their proposed standard is finalized. Melanie, this is Melanie from the Ohio Environmental Council.
Thank you, Laura. All right. So yes, Melanie Houston with the Ohio Environmental Council, Director of Water Policy and Environmental Health. As you've heard already from my colleagues here today, methane pollution poses a significant threat to public health and is a powerful driver of climate change. Until now, the oil and gas industry has been allowed to emit climate-warming methane pollution into the air without limit. We see some of the images of that here with the infrared camera footage behind me. August, as Laura stated, the US EPA took a common sense step forward by proposing the first ever national standards to reduce this harmful methane pollution from the oil and gas industry. The EPA standard will also serve to reduce what are known as hitchhiker air pollutants, like volatile organic compounds and other air toxics. We're here today to support the EPA standard to address methane from new and modified oil and gas sources, and to ask our Ohio congressional members to do the same. We're also here to demonstrate the diverse and broad base of support there is in Ohio for this standard. Just to share some numbers with you, since August, over 71,000 Ohioans, and to put that in perspective, that's enough people to fill up the Cincinnati Bengals Paul Brown Stadium, and then some. And that many people have spoken up in Ohio to say that the oil and gas industry should be held accountable for the air pollution that they create. Over 30 citizens living near oil and gas operations in Ohio have also submitted personal testimonies to the EPA in support of this standard. And there have been several health professionals in Ohio, including nurses, doctors, public health professionals, and 8 grassroots organizations and counting, who have signed on to separate national letters of support for this standard. And finally, in early November, a group of advocates representing labor, nurses, farmers, the environment, and the public interest, as well as affected citizens, met with congressional members from Ohio to offer their support for this standard. The proposed standard will have a dramatic effect for those living near to oil and gas operations, and an important effect for all Ohioans, given the air has no boundaries. We appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all today about this critical issue, and we thank you for your time, and I thank my colleagues for joining me here today to talk about this very important issue. We can take questions from the media in the back of the room, if you have any. We appreciate you being here.
Yeah, I actually have a couple questions here.
All right.
The first one is, how will these new proposed standards affect us here in Richland County?
All right, well, I can kick us off and then let the others join up here afterward. I think because we're talking about methane as a climate driver, greenhouse gas, there's a benefit really to be had for all Ohioans. We know that in Ohio we're affected by things like stronger storm events. The toxic algae blooms have been aggravated by warmer temperatures and more spring rain runoffs. Lyme disease, for example, is on the rise. These are effects that Ohioans can feel, whether it's here in Richland County or in other parts of the state from climate change. And so because methane is a stronger, more potent greenhouse gas than carbon, this is a very important standard to start to tackle a very important source of greenhouse gas pollution. You guys want to add to that?
Sure, I'd like to jump in with the jobs perspective, right? Is that many of our labor partners see this EPA methane rule as a job-creating potential. When you have to cap and do the right things to prevent these VOCs and methane from leaking into the ground, that of course creates jobs. Not only that, right at the immediate site, but eventually we hope that as these rules get stronger and stronger, we see this as an opportunity to convince our elected officials and folks that have to deal with the problems every day of our crumbling infrastructure. And that will also be a huge job creating potential. Also, oh, sorry, I just thought of something, one other thing is that, not only job creating potential, but the safety and health of not only the community members, but the folks that are doing the work, done right. We'd like to stress, because so many of the folks that do this work and do it right, of course, go through rigorous apprenticeship programs programs and training and know how to make sure it's always on time and on budget.
These methane emissions, they're across the country, and I'm asking our federal government to step up there and to really, for people to support these standards that would increase protections to the people of Mansfield, and specifically, more importantly, to our children. You walk into some of these areas where there's polluted air, and I've been in cities like this. It does cause, and I speak about asthma a lot, but it does cause flare-ups, and these things hurt. You struggle to breathe, and if you don't have a rescue inhaler, it could be life-threatening. So anything that can help reduce these issues with our air quality, I'm supporting.
Well, and it should be considered too, Mansfield is trying to work on building up the north end of town and increasing the quality of life for people who aren't necessarily in all of the residential areas. And unfortunately, the side effects of pollution tend to impact those who live in poverty or blighted areas because they don't necessarily have access to good health care. And asthma flare-ups, so they might not have a rescue inhaler because they can't afford it. They are more prone to dealing with the fallout from heavy rains or strong storms or anything that would damage their property, which could then bring in mold or even things like Lyme disease. They're just less protected just because of their financial situation. And if we can be responsible enough to clean up the air, then we can help everybody that way.
Very good, thank you. And thank you for those answers. Sounds like air currents and pollution don't notice geographic boundaries on the map. So that's why it's important to Richland County residents. So this kind of goes along with that. We have a proposed pipeline, Roper, and compressor stations here in Richland County. So folks are concerned about when will the rules go into effect.
So very briefly, the timeline is somewhat open, but as we understand, spring to summer 2016 for what is expected to be the finalization of the standard. Again, the standards cover new and modified, and they don't yet cover existing sources, but we need the finalization of this standard to occur first to set the framework for then addressing existing oil and gas sources.
So you said summer 2016 it might go into effect?
That's what the intelligence that we've heard to date.
So is it important for residents to stay engaged and to take action?
Very much so. Cheryl, would you like to speak to that?
Sure. At any point along this process, the regulations could be weakened. So staying engaged with your congressional leaders is very important all during this process to make sure that we get the strongest regulations possible, setting that precedent to bring existing sources online. We all probably have friends and neighbors that are living in communities that have oil and gas development. So we would like to get, as rigorous standards as possible to really, see improvement in those folks' lives, and as well as rigorous standards mean, bringing more folks into the workforce, into skilled labor force, to addressing leaks and addressing the capture of methane. So, really the stronger regulations we get, the more improvement in folks' lives we're going to see overall. So it's very important to stay engaged in this process.
And there are 4 days left until Friday, December 4th, to submit comments to the US EPA in support of the standard. And we'd like to see as many as possible. Keep growing that number, 71,000 and counting, of Ohioans supporting the standard.
So as I watch the video, Dylan, do you have a question? Okay. As I watch the video, it seems to show scenes of what's benign activity. We see smokestacks with nothing coming out, but then is a special camera being used to show these methane releases? Am I understanding that
That's right.
correctly?
Yes, it's called a FLIR camera, and it has the capability of doing two things. It shows infrared, which is what you're seeing right now is infrared camera, and then it also, the FLIR portion of the camera actually shows the hydrocarbon release. So when you see, the billowing image, that's actually the hydrocarbons which are methane and butane and other hydrocarbons that are being released, and those would be captured and put back into the market stream for use by residents.
So when we talk about methane, the nickname for that is natural gas, correct?
Yes.
And I know that in one of my favorite areas locally, the Mohican State Forest, as I hike through the forest, I see these pipeline infrastructures, or wells, storage wells in the Mohican area. But as I'm hiking and walking by some of these areas, I can smell gas. Are these methane leaks?
I'm not a scientist. I'm really not an expert in that. I have no answer other than that I'd be happy to try to find an answer for you. I would imagine somebody, would have an answer for you eventually, but I could, at least myself personally, I couldn't say.
Yeah, I think that, that leaks on our existing infrastructure is a real problem, and I know that the Blue-Green Alliance and organizations that we're working with on a regular basis are supporting investment to bring that infrastructure up to grade. So I think that that's something that's really, really important. Well, it's a separate issue. It is related to this issue overall. And I know Lee could talk more about the importance of needing to bring our infrastructure up to date, because it's woefully lacking, and we see information about gas lines exploding all the time. It's a lot of it's due to our aging infrastructure, which makes that important.
So these new rules are critical for long-term job generation as well, because of the situation I just described.
Yes.
There's a possibility that more work would need to be done.
That's right, yes.
Thank you.
This seems like a really big task. How exactly is it going to, are they just going to go plug these pipes that are leaking? I'm just having a hard time understanding how it's going to be done, because there's so much of it being released into the air. How are these people who are going to be in charge of standardizing this, what are they going to do?
One quick initial piece, as I understand, the industry will need to be using these cameras that we're looking at, right, the FLIR footage that we're looking at right now. That's actually an industry kind of best practice that our colleagues at Earthworks are using, right, to capture those leaks. And so that's something that is known in the industry. It's already in use to a certain extent for those good actors who are already taking these voluntary measures to address these methane leaks. And so we know that they'll have to do that. They'll have to do that at the well pad sites. They'll have to do that for compressor stations and some of the pumps, and for a lot of the infrastructure beyond the well pad as covered under this standard. And so they'll have to begin using some of these best technologies that are already existing to both detect first as the first step, and then to repair. But I do agree that it is an undertaking, but we know that it's already out there happening, and that it is also cost effective for the industry, because they're capturing a material that is as Bill noted, natural gas is the other name for methane, and that's being wasted. So they'll begin to capture that. So
Melanie, do you know what the time period is once the methane is detected for companies to comply with or to fix the leaks?
That's a great question, Don. I don't remember the exact figure off the top of my head. It's a timely fashion. I do know that. I can't remember if it's what exactly the time period is, but we can certainly find that out from the standard. I believe that's in the standard.
And then I want to make sure clear, there are companies that are already doing this, as Melanie mentioned, the good actors. So again, it's a little bit of a false choice when companies say, oh, we can't possibly afford this. We don't have the manpower to do this. There are examples of folks that are doing it and doing it well and doing it right. So again, false choice of when companies mention that, this is just going to be a burden on our bottom line. They will definitely recoup and then some the offset of capturing this these gases and
Yeah, I'm just imagining the critics saying, as soon as government comes in and tries to standardize private practices, these private industries can ramp up the prices for us, for the consumers. So is that a legitimate fear?
Well, this technology that is, obviously you can see that this footage has been done from some distance away. So we're talking like, maybe they're using helicopters to check their pipeline. So there are definitely ways that they can go about this because of the new technology, the technologies that are available for them to, find these leaks. They already go through a regulatory process. This federal government is not going to be on every single well pad checking for leaks. They're going to be working with the infrastructure that's already out there and working with the companies, which they have been doing. They've been talking a lot to the oil and gas industry that's already using these technologies, which is why we already know that it works. The state of Colorado passed a very similar regulation, as the US EPA is putting forward, and those folks are still making money, and there's not a slowdown in natural gas development in Colorado. So it works, it's doable, it's not onerous, it creates jobs in the process. And by having a standardized regulation across the board, it actually makes it easier for industry. They don't have to cherry pick things from one state to the other. They don't have to change their technology depending on where they're doing operation. They have one,
Level playing field.
a level playing field, and this happens all the time in business. We're always analyzing what we do in order to create efficiencies. This is an efficiency. It's a standardized across the board, leveling the playing field.
And Dylan, this is a threat to our health, so it's worth the fight. That's why we're all here today. So ramping up prices, we're here to fight for our children's health, the people of Mansfield for their health, for the countywide, for all of our health. This is an important issue to fight for.
And it'll benefit, though, those who are working in these industries too, because they're the people who are being exposed to it right off the bat. So if their companies would be wise to put forth effort to stop the leaks so that they protect their own employees first, and then they're not dealing with a high turnover or paying out for huge insurance settlements and things like that, they would be benefited.
One other just quick piece addition, Dylan, the EPA has also done cost-benefit types of analyses looking at monetizing essentially what the costs are of putting the new standard in place, and then what the monetized benefits are, and those both for the short term and the long term, the monetized benefits greatly outweigh the monetized costs, and the gap gets bigger, right, where the benefits are much larger than the costs over that long term, and those are really around the climate benefits, and they don't even go as far as to include some of the public health monetized benefits around the VOCs, because it really focuses on the methane. So huge benefits, again, like my colleagues are saying. But good questions.
Yes, it is. And for clarification, these proposed rules mainly address new construction, correct? It's a beginning
Newly
point,
modified.
so that we're doing something positive with the problem that already exists. So I think, We're not looking at going back and shutting down all these leaky stations and all the problems that exist. That'll be a long-term vision.
That's a
Is it fair
good,
to
it's a
state
good
that?
point, Bill, I think, because then the industry has that much more time to, you know, to adjust and prepare and get on board with, you know, making sure they're meeting this new standard. It's for new and modified sources, and then, you know, we would all here like to see that that the EPA then, upon finalization, will write new, you know, standard for those existing sources, but the industry will have time to get ready for that. And, but it is also important here in Ohio because we're, what, about 2,000, well, we have more infrastructure to come. We know we're so far along that we will have new and modified coming online.
And statistically, Ohio's air quality is not good. We're at, what, 6th in the nation for poorest air quality. So we should definitely support it, just because even though we can't necessarily see what's in the air, we are being impacted by it, and our children and our elderly, and it's not just contained to the one area where there's a well or